is the Thera Podcast. If you're a therapist, educator, counselor in training, or anyone interested in therapy, this is your epicenter for everything you should know. There are so many people in the world going through extreme mental and emotional issues, and we want to spotlight all the things we believe that work and the things that don't. They are wise sages, caring, intelligent, and are leaders in mental health counseling. The Thera Podcast. And here they are, Drs. Martin Wesley and David Whittinghill.
Welcome to the Thera Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Martin Wesley. And we have our co-host here, David. How are you doing, David?
I'm great, Marty. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's been a long time. I think the last time we met, we were actually, for the podcast at least, we were talking about people. In fact, what am I saying? I should probably introduce Jerry. Again, I was talking that we maybe should do the three amigos here.
Yeah.
But Gerald Juhnke, you're with us today too, and you were in that last podcast.
I was in the last podcast, and I had a blast. It was wonderful, Marty. Thank you.
Yeah. But anyway, I do want to say something before we go into what we're talking about today. But we talked about losing, beloved colleagues that time. And if you guys aren't aware, and I know I mentioned it, that Dr. Joffrey Saprina, who is, a colleague of all of ours as well. If you didn't know him, he was over the Dean of Programs for Argosy many years ago. I've been working with him very closely for quite a few years, good friend. And anyways, he passed away just a couple weeks ago. And anyways, just really sad. In fact, I had invited him even to come to that podcast, and he was really struggling at that time. But I was sort of wondering, he's usually open on those kind of things, and the talk that he would be talked about actually in something like this later. Anyways, I just wanted to mention that it's very sad that he is gone as well. So
sorry, Marty. It's hard.
I'll miss Joffrey.
Yeah, he was a good guy. He was, again, I think most people I would say pretty much all people, well, there may be some exceptions. Well, I shouldn't say that. But I mean, we have some really kind, great people in our profession. And sometimes when we get into these ideological debates and things, we sometimes miss that. And to me, that really hurts our profession.
Yeah.
Again, CESNET's a great tool, or can be a great tool, but my God, we sure pollute it with our hatred, unfortunately, that we spew on there at times. Well, I don't know if that's a good segue or not, Aaron, but I'm glad we've got somebody that I'm getting to know. I've been seeing your name quite a bit on CESNET, and we just introduced ourselves just a few minutes ago before we turn this all on. But Aaron and I, Kindsvatter, is that
Kindsvatter.
Kindsvatter. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Aaron, again, if you don't mind, for audience and for us too, is just to get to know you a little better. Who are you?
Well, sure. Hi, I'm Aaron Kindsvatter. I consider myself first and foremost an Enlightenment humanist. I'm a lover of people, and I'm a lover of the search for truth, and those are ideas that I picked up at Kent State University, where I got my PhD in counselor education and supervision, and then I eventually found my way to the University of Vermont, where I was a tenured professor, and I walked away from that in 2021 to start my own private practice in Burlington, Vermont, and enjoyed that very much. But then the weather in Vermont began to get to us, and so I was talking with my wife about moving somewhere, and I wanted to go to the Outer Banks, and she said, "How about St. Augustine?" And 18 months ago, I had never even heard of St. Augustine. And last August, I was moving into my house in St.
Really?
Augustine. So, and today I'm talking to you from my office here in St. Augustine, where I'm starting a new private practice.
Yeah, very cool. And yeah, so now you're a Floridian with David and I. So
Well, I don't know. It's because Floridians seem to be a people who have transferred here. I don't. In Vermont, you're only a Vermonter if you've been there for 30 years. So I'm thinking maybe there's no. I don't know. There might not be any kind of an entrance exam to call myself a Floridian.
no, good point. I don't know if there is either. I still got my heart in Kentucky, I got to admit.
Oh yeah. No. Well, I can understand why. Kentucky's a pretty special place.
Yeah. What about you, David? I'm curious. Is your heart still in Kentucky, or have you sort of assimilated here? So
I'm assimilated here now.
yeah,
Been here too long.
yeah. Well, I'll say it. I feel really good about it when it's winter, but when it's summer, I'm really struggle. So, well, Aaron, I mean, I think the one thing that, caught my eye, of course, is when you sort of, I think, introduced this EEOC complaint against CACREP, and you were letting, you posted that on CESNET.
Yeah.
And that, I think, hit us all as to what's going on. And maybe, for some of us, that was maybe some of the complaints that were mentioned in that, sort of hit home. Maybe for some of us it didn't, and we would like to know more. But again, why don't you, if you don't mind, walk us through that a little bit, as to why was that necessary? What are the complaints? Again, I just sort of want to know and why CACREP, I guess, in some ways, because, and here, just a little background is, to me, I'm thinking that a lot of your complaint, or what I'm seeing in there, is more higher education general.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that CACREP hasn't fallen along with that. I probably think that they probably have in some ways, but I'm sort of curious, why CACREP? So.
Yeah. First, let me clarify that the complaint was brought by the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism and not me, although I have worked with a committee that has been looking into CACREP specifically. But to understand the complaint that went to the Office of Civil Rights, you sort of need to go back a little bit further and look at some of the trends that have been occurring in counselor education, which probably started sometime around 2013. And it was the beginning of the injection of illiberalism in counselor education. And this probably has something to do with the work of Gerald Juhnke Sue. And if you go back and you look at Sue's, I think it was his 2010 book, and then or 2010 article, I think in American Psychologist, and then later his book, Sue brought out the concept of microaggressions. And what was interesting was the language that Sue used to talk about microaggressions. Microaggressions, as I'm sure most people will know, are sort of unintentional slights that might occur between people who are different from each other. And when Sue described these, he used the term perpetrator and victim. So he began to sort of, he almost added a criminal element to the concept of microaggressions. And what came at the same time was that when thinking about, important concepts like racism in the profession, uh, we went from thinking in terms of intent to impact. And so starting around 2013, you can now hold someone, and so the concept of what racism is expands very broadly during this time. And so now it's possible to be racist without any conscious intent to be racist, and who decides whether something was racist or not is based on somebody's perception. And so about the same time, there were these concepts of unconscious bias coming forth. And so what happened is two things. The concept of what is racist lost its guardrails or its parameters, so that somebody who has no particular prejudice or preference for people of a particular race can now legitimately be accused of unconscious racism, or having a racial impact, which is conflated with our old understanding of racism that includes actual hate. And so all of this begins to inform the DEI movement, the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement, and the intersectionality movement that then begins to gain steam within counselor education. And at the same time, we see the rise in universities of so-called bias response teams, where there's now sort of an administrative mechanism to sort of come and investigate things like microaggressions. And the problem is that people are walking around not knowing, having no, racist intent or anything like that, and not knowing if they might do something that that then constitutes racism that can then be investigated. So all of these ideas sort of find their way into counselor education. Then probably the last thing that came at about the same time that DEI is you have concepts like anti-racism and white fragility coming into the idea. And the central tenet of both white fragility and anti-racism is that it is racist to not believe in the tenets of these ideologies. So these ideologies, D'Angelo's anti-fragility ideas, for example, are insulated from criticism because criticism of them is taken as evidence of white fragility, and criticism of anti-racism is taken as racism. So the parameters for acceptable thought, for describing very real problems that counselors address in the room. And I can tell you, I have many, many Black clients, many gay clients, transgender clients, and I regularly hear about racism. Even in Burlington, Vermont, I heard about homophobia and transphobia. So those things are absolutely out there. But how they are talked about in the university and solutions to societal problems become very acceptable thought around them becomes very circumscribed and has to fit within a very narrow ideology. And what happened is CACREP either CACREP went along with this, or CACREP set the parameters for this. And in the most recent iteration of the CACREP laws, in part of the student dispositions, now gives CACREP the ability, or it gives faculty members potentially the ability to make a judgment whether a student has acceptable beliefs. In other words, if a student is being ideologically compliant, and some students are then asked to leave their programs, not because they're racist in any meaningful sense of the word, but because they don't go along with this, with sort of a narrow progressive ideology. And that's what the substance of this complaint is about. And if a person, so that's a very long answer to your question, Martin, but that is what is going on. That's the history of what brought us here.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're sort of saying that CACREP has been in some ways enabling indoctrination rather than education.
They have, and what's particularly dangerous about CACREP is there's no competitors to it. All the states are now taking, for example, in Florida, where it seems like most of us are. We got one Texan here, but in Florida, to get licensed in Florida, you now have to go through a CACREP accredited program. And 10 or 12 years ago, none of us would have had a problem with that. It was a way of setting standards. But to a certain extent, CACREP has allowed itself to become an ideological organization. And so it's opened itself up to ideological abuse. Now, the downstream impact of this, like the part with the complaint that we need to think about is that students are being subjected to a kind of political pressure in the classroom that I think legitimately could be called abusive. But people are not okay on the flip side of these interactions in these classes, which closely resemble Maoist struggle sessions. Even somebody with the highest degree of ego strength has a very hard time, coming out the other side of that being okay. What's even worse, though, is that if you look at the multicultural and social justice counseling competencies, which I realize are not a part of CACREP, but if you take a look at those competencies, they are in direct contradiction to the ACA Code of Ethics, which says very plainly that we do not indoctrinate, we do not impose our values or beliefs on our patients. And the multicultural and social justice counseling competencies say in plain language that we should help our patients to understand their situations in terms of a society that has oppressors and oppressed, and it says a lot of terrible things in there. So downstream of this, the first stop is there are abusive things going on in some counselor education programs, and people are being forced out based on their unwillingness to adopt a strict progressive view of the world, a constrained progressive view of the world. Downstream of this, counselors are being encouraged to indoctrinate their patients. So it's not just, it's so the fact that every program, the fact that CACREP is becoming more ubiquitous and has no competitors, means that this will be a serious problem and that patients are going to have a very hard time, especially patients who might be right of center or centrist, or I have many patients who are on the left who have come to me because they have gotten in trouble at work because they've been in these DEI or anti-racist trainings, and they've raised questions and have then had, people turn on them, and anyone who, follows some of the conversations I participate in CACREP, you can imagine what it's like to be on the other side of that if you're a person who's not well versed in these ideas and who's vulnerable in their workplace, just receiving all of this animus. And counselors are responsible for that. It's counselors who are doing these DEI trainings. And, a CACREP, insofar as it is responsible for setting standards within the profession, has not taken note of this, nor do they seem to have thought about how their current policies may end up being distorted or used to ideological ends. Boy, you ask a former professor to talk, and boy, he's going to talk. So I hope I'm being clear.
No, you've been fine. Again, here we are. Again, people are just hearing the audio part of this, but, we're looking on Zoom right now at each other, and you got a good head of hair there. So I can't see if you got any horns through that hair, because, the way I people respond to you on CESNET, it's almost like you are the devil in disguise.
Well, but you can understand why that is. Like, there's a current conversation going on CESNET right now, and it may be something that I owe an apology for. I need to think about it, but these are serious issues that cut right to the bone of our humanity. And it's understandable why someone who stands up and says, this isn't good, we should stop this, please consider other ideas. Even if you try to do that in a polite way. Let me explain it this way. Does anyone have cats? Do any of you guys have cats?
No.
We're a dog. I'm a dog person.
Okay, I'm a dog. Okay, well, cats are. I have cats, and the one thing that will wipe the smile off of any cat owner's face is when the vet says, "Uh-oh, your cat needs a pill." And the reason this is a problem is because, unlike dogs, cats are really still wild animals. And so when you try to give them a pill, they'll scratch you, they'll claw you. Chances are you're going to end up with an unpilled cat and a bloody owner. And so the vet, saw my anxiety reaction when he said that my cat needed a pill. And he said, don't worry. And he sold me these things called pill pockets, right? And what this is a really tasty, moist treat that you can then wrap around the pill, and you give it to the cat, and it works like magic. People who have adopted this sort of Maoist or socialist ideology really understand the concept of the pill pocket, right? And so what they do is they take these ideas that are designed to sort of create divisiveness in order to allow a political ideology to come in and fill the gaps between people. They couch that ideology as in terms that are highly palatable to most people. So they use terms like anti-racism. Well, who isn't anti-racist? Who doesn't want less racism. And they use terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion. Who doesn't love diversity? Who doesn't want equity? Who wants to exclude people? You know, no reasonable person could be against anti-racism or diversity, equity, and inclusion. The difficulty is those words are just pill pockets, and the ideas beneath them say, adopt our way of thinking, right? Understand the world is that people are not individuals. They are composites of their identity categories and must be understood as either oppressors or victims. And those ideas are not palatable. Call them diversity, equity, and inclusion, or call them anti-racist, or whatever, they become very palatable. So then you have someone like me who comes along and says, I reject the tenets of anti-racism. I reject the tenets of DEI. Not only do I reject them, I think they're bad. Of course, people are going to think that I'm a terrible person. You know, they're good people. And of course, they're going to think, you know, I have terrible intent. And they're going to think that, I don't know, that I'm, you know, an honest to God white supremacist who's trying to like maintain a space in society for white people or something like. Of course, they're going to think that. And so, you know, of course, people are going to think I have horns or you know, that I'm the embodiment of ignorance or something like that. Of course, they're going to think that, and you really can't hold it against them. But I do think that there's a manipulation taking place, and that proponents of this ideology are counting on the fact that nobody wants to be in the position that I am in, of being, you know, viewed as, you know, a racist or a transphobe or you know, or all the other names that they might call you.
Aaron, I am really appreciative of you explaining your thoughts, because when I first read this, not related to this, but related to CESNET and some of the comments and what was going on, I was like, why in the world would you have a suit against my CACREP?
Yeah.
And this helps explain some things. So unlike you guys who are in Florida, Texas is opposed to DEI. And so anything.
Oh, we're in Florida, remember?
Yeah, I was joking. I know for a fact you guys fight the same battles that we do. And one of the things that's going on here is that legislature has made some major changes. So anything to do with DEI, or even the hint or smell of DEI by their interpretation, has to be removed from courses, books, materials. So this is most interesting to me. It really is. And I appreciate you being so honest and frank. I was also struck by your discussion about CACREP being the only accreditation body. And I immediately, when you said that, I was like, yeah, that's right. I don't like that. I would like more. But then I remembered AMA, APA, co-AMFT. There's only one accreditation body for each of us. And, you know, I remember back in the late 70s, early 80s, I guess it was the mid 80s, when APA said that the vast majority of their faculty and their programs had to graduate from APA accredited programs.
Yeah.
And I felt like I I didn't like that fact. And then I did not like the fact when ACA seemed to, and yet I understand there's reasons for this, but it seemed to be almost like a tit for tat kind of thing. You said that you would hire our people, we're not going to hire your people. What I've encountered a lot are folks who believe that counselors are like junior psychologists and not trained well as junior psychologists because they're not real psychologists. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah.
So I had internship sites where when we were trying to get our master's and doctoral folks into, one of the things they would talk about was assessment. And our folks didn't have the knowledge on MMPIs, Milans, that kind of stuff. Fortunately for me, the program I graduated from, we had to take projective intellectual assessment, personality assessment, and all. So I qualify for all, or I used to. I don't know if I do anymore. It's been 40 years. So who knows what I qualify for. But what I didn't like was being basically told by some of these internship sites that our students weren't good enough because they were like junior psychologists. And I remember having consultation with some of these folks, and I was like, thank God we do belong to CACREP because it does give us a standing. But it's very exclusive. And if you don't graduate from a CACREP accredited program, it really limits maybe your master's and certainly your doctoral level graduates. So hearing your conversation today really has made me think, Aaron, and I appreciate that. And I'm sorry of my ignorance related to what the real crux was that you were getting at. And I appreciate you just being so honest and bringing that on out. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And I do understand why I think it kind of has to happen to you before you understand how powerful this process is. And then you're on the other side of, say, a struggle session, for example, and you begin to read about these issues and you look at the concept of, say, anti-racism, and you begin to understand that there are all these voices that are missing, and the voices that are missing in that conversation are, the voices of say, Black moderates or Black true liberals, or even Black conservatives like Thomas Sowell, where there are all kinds of different ideas about why we're facing societal ills and what we should do about them. And I think those are absolutely worthy of study, and it's a real shame if it's hard to do that now in counselor education because of this overreaction to the DEI stuff. But I think what people are trying to do is they're trying to parse the education and the interventions from the ideology. And the problem is that even back in my days of training in the late 1990s in my master's degree, people were very clear is there's no difference between education and political action. So it's very hard to parse out, the education from the indoctrination, because if you read the current iteration of Sue's textbook, Counseling the Culturally Different, it's shocking even for somebody who is expecting what one is going to find. And so yeah, I on the one hand, I understand the overreaction. On the other hand, I can't think of a time where it would be more important to be well versed in issues surrounding race and our differences and how those originated and what our legacies are. And all of that is out there, and it's fascinating and wonderful. But if you only look at it from within the confines of a very narrow progressive lens, you really, you come away with a racialization. And so one of the things that I think is really gross, and I really have a hard time being polite about this particular concept, is, and I had spoken out about this publicly when I was still teaching, was this concept of whiteness that is coming out. And people, again, because this touches a lot of people very carefully, in a very sensitive place. When people hear me, someone who looks like me, talking about, hey, whiteness is a bad idea, they think that, I don't know, like I want to celebrate white people, or I want to protect white people, or something like that. What I'm saying is a bad idea is when you start pointing the fingers at racial groups and identifying them as the location of societal ills, that almost never goes well, and it has a tendency to expand, and it reifies racialization as a legitimate means of societal change. And so that started the conversation that has led us to 2023 on campus, having people railing against Jewish students. Why? Well, because they're white adjacent. And Asian students. Why? Because they're white adjacent. And the reason that's okay, and the reason the Claudine Gays of the world have difficulty in answering complaints about that, is because in their worldview, racialization is it's an acceptable means. The base tribal impulses are an acceptable means to manipulate in order to engender societal change.
Mm-hmm. To me, it's interesting that one of the most influential studies in understanding the psychological harm of racism was the Black Doll, White Doll study, by the Clarks. And it showed how, children internalize racial hierarchies and bias, often seeing whiteness as good and blackness as bad. And it really helped, I think, help our country change for the better in many ways. But today it seems like in at least some areas of higher education, and I think you're arguing, and I would agree in some cases in counselor education, we seem to have unintentionally swung the pendulum too far to the point where we're almost betraying whiteness in a sense as inherently problematic, as being privileged, almost oppressive in and of itself, just being white. And to me, that is the concern, that literally we are creating, we are discriminating based on color once again, except in the opposite direction. So how would you say, does counselor education actually avoid overcorrecting in ways where we can talk about these things? To me, multicultural counseling is so absolutely essential, but because we walked into this area of social justice, we have to have something to fight against rather than actually meeting people where they are. And I don't know, to me, that has been a turn not in the right direction for counselor education. Just curious what you think.
Well, I mean, I absolutely agree. And I can tell you what I have struggled with, because what I am at the core, like, people think that I'm very conservative or whatever, and I'm not particularly. I'm I'm a liberal. I became activated politically because I'm a gay rights activist, and I have very strong objections to gender ideology, insofar as it targets children. But I am absolutely an advocate for trans people, and it's no fun to be. Well, okay, before I go there, I will say so. But what's hard for me as a traditional liberal is I don't want to tell anybody that they're wrong. I want to get curious about why they think something. And, I want to always have intellectual humility. And in other words, as a traditional liberal, is very, very hard for me to say no. And unfortunately, what needs to happen in counselor education, if it's going to remain viable, is that people have to say no, we're not going to use concepts like whiteness as a means of societal change. No, we're not going to assume that we know what is going on in people's subconscious, when it comes to concepts like implicit bias.
Yeah.
No, we are not going to conceptualize people as in terms of oppressors and oppressed. And until it becomes okay for somebody like me to say no, I mean, even if I was tenured, the consequences of saying no right now in the profession. I can't believe that you guys are interested in meeting with me publicly. I was like so grateful. I'm so like lonely for like contact with counselor educators, but you really, we can't place people who question these ideas. We can't make them into pariahs, or we've got to take the time to understand them as something more than, awful, ignorant people who are trying to oppress others for their own gain. But what that requires of traditional liberals like me is we have to say no. We have to say no. No. Even if somebody is crying and upset and making claims that they're harmed by us saying no, we still have to say it. And the reason that that the profession is really in trouble is because the ACA is saying two contradictory things at the same time. The backbone of our profession is our ethics, and our ethics say clearly we do not impose our beliefs or our values upon our patients. But the ACA has also endorsed the multicultural and social justice counseling competencies, which say we do impose our beliefs and values on our patients. It's our not only is it a perfect right, is our obligation
To advocate.
Well, not just to advocate. Advocating, I'm okay with. And there's plenty to advocate. The things that I have seen since I began practicing, the breaches of justice are astounding. So there's plenty for counselors to advocate for around these issues, but we can't mistake, the insertion of sort of a Maoist or a socialist political ideology disguising itself as advocacy. We kind of can't. We have to say no to that, and that's very hard for liberals to do. And then it really, it takes a toll on individuals to sort of be a pariah. Like I don't, for a long time after I started speaking out about these issues, when I was still at the university, I couldn't stand to hear my own name because it was always, it was like the word "that" would always come before my name. That Aaron Kindsvatter, and then, white supremacist, transphobe, homophobe, etc. And these had, I heard those things from former students who had been to my house and had dinner over movie nights and who knew me and my wife and my cats. And so there's a heavy price to be paid, and that for saying no and to saying I disagree and I'm not going to go along with this, and I'm going to tell you how I'm thinking about this. There's a heavy price to be paid, and that I don't know how we can go forward if the people who do speak up are going to be pounced on, even if they're tenured. I'm sure even if I was tenured, they'd still sort of find a way to sort of get rid of me or make my life miserable or whatever. So
I'm sorry you've gone through that, Aaron. There's no excuse. To me, that's the point, is that, higher education should be about views and different views and us discussing them within, with intelligence and empathy, especially in counselor education. And that's what has bothered me to some degree with when you were posting, is they seem to always, a lot of responses come back and they want to point out these allegations against you, even though I've never really read what the allegations were, except that you were, like you say, a pariah. Anyways, I don't know if you wanted to address that, but it's almost like you just come back. I think the last time you came back and said something along the line, well, don't go to that one. Here, I'll give you some more to read about.
You do, like you kind of have to have a thick skin, and you have to, how you find a way to love even difficult patients in a completely romantic sense, but you see the humanity behind what people are doing. I think you have to find that, and you have to not be surprised by the things that they're saying. And I guess you have to, for me, it really helped to understand this as a cultural phenomenon. Like I think, and I don't want to be hyperbolic, but I suspect this is something akin to what the Cultural Revolution in China must have been like. Certainly not with that level of violence, but if you go back and you look at articles on like the Red Guard and so forth, like a lot of the behavior that you see is sort of, what you would expect from, young people who are very impressionable and who have a moral foundation that says, I will, above all other things, protect people from harm. And you then begin to understand, like, some of the vitriol and sort of where it comes from. But yeah, there were a lot of accusations, against me, so that, some former students came out and said that they didn't feel safe with me during advising sessions, and somebody accused me of being someone who showed up drunk to class and things like that. So you do sort of have, because they have trouble grasping onto exactly what it is that they're angry about, then, sometimes in the fervor of the moment, it becomes, some of them, the ones who are perhaps less differentiated, will then become, creative in order to support this point that they feel must absolutely be true, but they just can't grasp onto anything. They can't quite engage with the ideas that are being shared because they're overwhelmed with the with the desire to protect the vulnerable, which is admirable, on some level, but it's also sort of a, it's a way to narrow the conversation and keep it confined within acceptable parameters.
And it ends up with ad hominem attack on you.
Immediately, because the reason is because shame is such a powerful motivator, and so if you like, I think one of the worst things I can imagine being is a racist, somebody who would look at another person and look down upon them because of their race or ethnicity. And I think I think we could all agree on that. It's just the concept of what is racist is so broad right now. But in the old sense, it's like the very worst thing that you could be in the counselor education circles is someone who's racist. And so the accusations of racism, it has career ending, there's all kinds of bias response teams and so forth that'll investigate you now, and they'll be able to find racism because what constitutes racism is so broad. It's sort of like, well, one time a student didn't feel safe when you did X. But also the personal shame of being told that one is a racist is a powerful motivator to sort of, well, it's negative reinforcement, right? It's sort of like, I'm going to adhere to the ideology in order to avoid the shaming that is behind those, the ad hominem attacks where someone says, well, you're racist. What they're really saying is, stop attacking my ideology and get back in line.
Two politically incorrect counseling professors and therapists with never-ending experience and wisdom who are proud to be politically incorrect. You're listening to the Thera Podcast. Now, back to your hosts, Drs. Martin Wesley and David Whittinghill.
Shouldn't we be teaching critical race theory alongside, color blindness, from books like, The End of Race Politics from Coleman Hughes? To me, it seems like we should be balancing this on both sides rather than thinking, okay, well, our program is this and our program is that. I don't know.
That is exactly what I did when I was teaching, and it really got me in trouble.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because what you're
that's education.
But
education.
But it's your education. Okay, let me play devil's advocate, right? Your education is steeped in traditions of white supremacy, and the idea that you should compare one idea to another, the idea that you should bring that kind of skepticism is steeped in a history that has exploited people of color. And to quote Andrea Lord, you can't use those master's tools to undo this patriarchal, racist structure. Like that's how, that's sort of those are the convictions that one is up against because I did exactly what you were suggesting, because the other people that I'm really angry with is the AAUP, which we had a chapter of at the University of Vermont, but they incorporated DEI. They allowed the incorporation of DEI into professor evaluations. And again, remember, DEI is a pill pocket, right? And so what they're really, so they're able to say, well, by including Coleman Hughes or including John McWhorter or by including Thomas Sowell, some of your students were made uncomfortable by that. And based on their lived experiences, you need to avoid making people uncomfortable. Otherwise, you're going to be like that Aaron Kindsvatter, and you don't want that.
Well, that's why I was so happy to see this last Supreme Court's unanimous decision that happened a week ago, is that they were saying for the most part that it's that in protecting the rights of the minority, you have to protect the rights of the majority. It does not, and again, we're all in minority statuses and majority statuses. I mean, because we're not just about skin color. We're from Irish descent, which was discriminated against. We're from, many different aspects of who we are as individuals, with these intersectional identities, not intersectionality, but intersectional identities. We're not just about skin color. Anyways, I thought it was just so important that they actually raised that and were so profound on that, is because again, that's how we protect everyone in this process. And
it is. But you wonder, I wonder, Martin, how long will it be until that decision finds its way into sort of CACREP? And
oh yeah, no, I agree. It'll take time.
It will take a very long time, Aaron.
Yeah.
I think right. So it's reassuring that those protections are there, but in the meantime, there are going to be some people who suffer, and those people are faculty members who quietly don't agree with these ideas. Those people are students who, don't agree with these ideas, and the eventual patients who are going to go to counselors who think they have an absolute duty to make them their patients aware, either that they live in an oppressive society that's against them, or that they themselves bear the guilt of a history of exploitation.
Yeah. And again, is this, I mean, everything that you've been talking about, unfortunately, I think you've made a statement early that unless you felt it, you wouldn't understand. And while I think all of us as counselors, hopefully can put ourselves in in a way in which we can empathize with any group, hopefully, that's what our education's about. I do hear you there, but here's the deal, is I think most of us have, in many ways, experienced or seen this discrimination in higher education in many ways. And I'll just be plain frank. And I even mentioned it in one of our podcasts in the past, but I mean, I've been in religious schools where they discriminated against a Sikh. They discriminated against a Jew, a Jewish man, because they did not fit their criteria. But I've also been in the secular schools that have absolutely said we will not hire another white person.
Mhm.
And that is absolutely against the law. And unless we, fight against that, which what I'm hearing from you is that's what you've been trying to do, is just to see the inconsistencies here, is that, we're not going to protect any group unless we actually, fight for both sides.
Well, we can't allow I think that the social justice people, people who are steeped in sort of social justice circles might be surprised to find that, I do agree that we have inborn based tribal impulses that it behooves us to constantly resist. Now, I follow the literature on the unconscious bias, which is mixed, but I have absolutely no trouble believing that people want to and are hardwired to form, affinity groups. I'm sorry, I lost my. But so what we have to make sure that we don't let those base impulses become reified in our policies and in our way of understanding each other and in what we're teaching impressionable young adults and in how we are interacting with our patients. And I think right now, unfortunately, that is where we are at. So, we need there really is going to have to be like some kind of U-turn in counseling, but I don't know how that's going to happen. I don't know how to be more gentle than I have endeavored to be on CESNET, for example, in bringing up these ideas. I don't know what a nice way to say this that other people could hear would be. So imagine the first, who is going to be the first ACA president who's going to say, in following our ACA code of ethics, we can no longer think of people in broad categories like oppressor and oppressed. Imagine what would happen to that person. And, they'd be putting their career on the line. So how does that change? Is it that a group of people chooses to get together and say that, the 20 of us adhere to this reality and we understand there are objections to that, but, we cannot have racialization and tribalism informing our policies, no matter how good the intentions behind it are. I just don't know what the change looks like, and I don't know how successful I'm being. But one of the things, my motivation in being active on CESNET is to try to show what a gentle conversation around these issues looks like. But, I think probably a lot of people aren't seeing that.
Aaron, in about 1986, 1988, I was at the AAMFT National Conference. And I think it was LaPiccolo was doing a presentation on sexual addiction. And he made the comment, he was talking about Patrick Carnes' work related to sexual addiction, and he pretty much got booed off stage by people in the audience who did not believe in what was termed as sexual addiction. And, that was a number of years ago, but I think what that suggests to me is that change takes time. And a lot of beliefs are culturally relevant right now. And over time, I believe our culture changes.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's helpful or not. Not that I was trying to come up with an answer, but I think in essence, all of these issues that we're talking about, over time, they do change and we make major change. I mean, think about Columbus saying the world was round.
Mm-hmm.
Everything we do is sifted and questioned, and like we were a fool for saying the world was round when everybody thought it was flat. And it takes time to be able to really comprehend and understand, and to not. So what it seems like to me, it's just my thought. No one has to agree with this. I'm probably wrong, but it seems like to me is that we have a lot of people who like to argue.
Yeah.
And so as soon as you say something that they disagree with, they feel it's their place to argue and to prove that you're wrong. And I don't think that's what education is about. Education, in my mind, is having, you called it a humble humility a little while ago or something like that. It's just a humbleness to say, I don't know everything. So come talk to me and let's talk about this so I can understand what you're doing or what we're saying here.
You're such a great guy to listen to, Jerry. I love that you're saying that, and I really connect with the way that you're describing. But it's also really hard then, from that place of humility, to say no. No, I'm sorry. Racialization is not okay. So there has to be a group. Someday at the ACA, they're going to be sitting around a large table, and at some point, somebody's going to have to say, no, we can't do this. We have to change how we're thinking about what it is that we're doing. And maybe I haven't figured this out yet, but sometimes I don't know how the humility and that kind of, I guess, moral certainty that, mightn't or certain enough that something is wrong to stand up and say no. Sometimes those things don't go together very easily for me. And so I don't know.
But I think I'm hearing from both of you. I mean, Jerry, I hear you. It is going to take time. Aaron, I almost hear from you. It's almost going to take a split. I'm sure hoping we can come together because our society can't handle this anymore, of this divisive polarization of our politics and fighting and shooting each other, for God's sakes, because we don't agree with each other. We have got to come together to figure this out in a humane way. And I think counselor educators, of anyone, should be the ones that model that. Right. Unfortunately, we're not very good at it, especially on CESNET sometimes. But there are good voices. I think there are the remnant. Hopefully, we can all model that in a way that is respectful and can make that change to where we can actually embrace each other in this great profession that we're part of. And
it is a great profession.
Yeah.
It is. And when you have people like, and I'm just going to throw this on out, David won't like this, but, earlier you talked about love, and you said basically not Eros love, but
right.
Philippi, like brotherly love. When I think of people who love other people, David Whittinghill is one of the first people who comes to mind. That's not blowing smoke. That's just really the truth, because I've known David since, how long have we known each other? Since like 93, 83. It's got to have a 3 in it.
Yeah.
And the reality is, he and I got kicked out of, we did, what's it called? Up on the Hill. We got kicked out of more legislators' offices because you know what? I kind of got sassy mad. Not David. David was like, well, was it Thurgood, Strong. What was the guy's name that we got kicked out of his office, David?
I can't
South
remember.
Carolina. Thurman Strong.
Yeah.
Oh my, you saw that guy?
We were escorted out of the office. Now, maybe I'm wrong with this, David. Your memory's probably better than me, but we told them that what we wanted and what we were petitioning for, which was Medicare or Medicaid for counselors.
That's right.
Reimbursement. And basically he said, "Where are you boys from?" And because I don't sound like I'm from North Carolina, I was at the time North Carolina. And I think he basically said, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he maybe said, "Where are you boys from?" And David said, "I'm from Alabama." Now he actually is not from Alabama, but he was he was a chair of a department down in Alabama. I was in North Carolina, and Thurman said, "Neither of you boys are from Alabama or North Carolina." And it's this defensiveness. David never got pissed off about that. He just, I think he put his arm over my shoulder and he said, "David, or Jerry, they're just not going to change right now, but they will change."
Yeah.
And, David's that kind of person. I think Marty and you are as well, Aaron, that, you just love other people. And you talked about this with clients. Now, I've experienced this with folks who would qualify for borderline personality disorder. And they are, people, they're not bad people. They're somebody's mother, they're somebody's father, they're somebody's, loved one. And they're very difficult to work with, very demanding. And instead of getting mad at them, which is unproductive, but to listen to them on out, helping draw boundaries, talking about what's acceptable behavior and what's not, and how they will they have an opportunity to do a voluntary hospitalization. And if they want to leave, in the Catholic faith, it talks about sins of omission and commission. I kind of do the omission, If you go on in and you're there for 24 hours and you want to leave, you do so. I didn't tell the other half of that. The people there don't think you ought to leave. You're going to be there for 72 hours. I mean, that's the truth. I'm a liar, so I didn't say the last part. But I think we have so many loving and kind people in counseling. And loving and kind doesn't mean like Pollyannish.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But loving and kind, who are truthful and who are just really genuine. I mean, if you look at being genuine, one of my former friends, Richard Watts, was really into a guy by the name of Adler, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But what my readings on Adler and my conversation with, I never met Adler, but my conversations with Richard were related to really him being loving to people. Mm-hmm. I think that's so cool.
Well, he had that idea of social interest, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what Adler meant.
Yes.
Talking about social interest.
Yes.
Don Bubenzer.
Oh, don't talk about Don. He's so mean. Don West and Don Bubenzer.
John West and Don Buber, they taught me how to be a humble human being, and if I could be like one person, it would be Don Bubenzer, man. And
right after David Whittinghill, I agree. Don Bubenzer would be the guy. He was so gracious and kind to me in the late 80s, mid 80s, allowing me to stay at his house. I did a presentation at Kent. And he was just so caring and kind, and so was John West. They were wonderful men, and I just have utmost respect for them. And the program at Kent is a phenomenal program. Yeah, it's got a history. And I'm trying to remember the gentleman who used to be, maybe he graduated from Kent and then went down to Florida. David, you know who this is. This is one of your professors. It was, who was it down at Florida who graduated from Kent?
Joe Whitmer?
The other one. Larry Lesh. Larry was not the friend. I'm sorry, I'm probably talking poorly about. I'm not trying to talk more. Larry had pretty strong feelings about things, but you know what? He always was, in my mind, he was kind to people. Yeah. I mean, he might shut down conversations, but people feared him. But he actually was a very kind person, and he had very strong beliefs. David, was he your chair, or was?
Yes, he was.
Yeah. And so don't get it out that he was a nice guy, but he was a very nice guy. Yeah. He graduated from Kent too, I think.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to get at is I think change takes time. And I don't think anybody embraces change like, oh my God, this is different. We're going to do that right now. I'm anything that really takes time. I mean, think about Ellis and his work.
Yeah.
Talk about getting people upset. DeShazer did the same thing. They were dissatisfied with psychodynamic and tried something new, and people didn't like what they were doing.
That's right.
At least that's my recollection. I remember DeShazer getting not booed off stage, but people didn't like what he was saying, and he was talking about brief therapy and called people clients. What was it, window seekers or window lookers, or
Yeah. He was always saying really funny things too. DeShazer used to always say these. He'd talk about the postmodernists who had everything is relative, and he would say the morality is relative, and he would say things like these postmodernists, they're great, but you don't want to let one hold your wallet.
Well, I just want to say, I just think change takes time. And I was at a conference, an AMFT conference, where I used to go to a lot of those because my background was marriage and family, and my master's was in marriage and family. And there was a woman with my major advisor, my dissertation chair was a guy by the name of Alan Hovestad. And Alan is a delight. He is phenomenal in so many different ways. And I was working at a community mental health agency up in Michigan. And the clients I was working with had severe disorders and severe psychopathology. And I was not real successful with the majority of these folks because it was just really severe. And I was doing family therapy with him. Long story short, Alan said, you've got to go listen to this woman, Michelle Weiner Davis. And he talked about solution-focused therapy. And I was God, that's not going to work with my clients. So I was working with this very severe population. I was trying to do all the things that I was taught to do. And I thought, well, what the hell? I'll try the solution-focused therapy thing that Michelle talked about. Bingo, it worked. But I remember arguing against her for so long, not her personally, but this idea that you don't have to have insight to change. I still don't know if you have to or don't have to have insight, but her whole perception was we change these behaviors and then we change thinking, and it was very strong. And what I'm just trying to say is I think change takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Jerry, speaking of time, we probably should close this out, or nobody's going to listen to this end anyways. But I'm looking forward to actually talking with you guys after this is done, and I press to stop recording. But hey, it's been a pleasure, Aaron. I just want to say that.
It's been a genuine pleasure to meet you all.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much, Aaron.
I learned a lot from you, Aaron. Thank you. Thank you.
Same here.
Welcome. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with you.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Thera Podcast. If you're a therapist, educator, a counselor in training, or anyone interested in therapy, this is your epicenter for everything you should know. Dr. Martin Wesley and Dr. David Whittinghill are counseling professors and therapists who have endless knowledge and wisdom. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten something from it. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, you can find our website at www.therapodcast.com. Find the show on all the major podcast platforms. And if you'd like to email Wesley, send it to wesleyphd@gmail.com. Take care and see you next time on the Thera Podcast.